A quiet suburban home, a loving mother, its innocent children, and one unspeakable crime that shattered an entire community. When 32-year-old Melissa Ray and her 2 children were found dead in their beds, it seemed unthinkable. There were no signs of forced entry, but haunting messages were left behind written on the nursery wall. Detective Laura Benson, a longtime friend of the family, was called to the scene, only to find herself unraveling a dark web of betrayal, secrets, and emotional manipulation. As investigators dug deeper, suspicion turned towards someone no one wanted to believe could be guilty. This full episode uncovers the heartbreaking truth of what really happened inside that home and the twisted path that led to justice. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that shake the soul and search for truth. It was the kind of neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked, where kids rode bikes until dusk and neighbors waved from their driveways. The houses sat in perfect rose lawns trimmed, porch lights glowing just before sunset. Nothing bad ever seemed to happen in places like this, until it did. On the morning of October 14th, 2021, emergency responders arrived at a quiet cul-de-sac in Brookdale, Ohio, after a 911 call from a concerned coworker. 32-year-old Melissa Ray hadn't shown up for her shift at the local clinic. She hadn't called in. She hadn't responded to messages. And when a friend stopped by her house, something felt wrong. The front door was locked, blinds drawn, and no one answered the bell. What came next would change the community forever. Inside the home, Melissa and her 2 children, 5-year-old Lily and 3-year-old Jonah, were found in their beds, peaceful, still, too still. At first glance, there were no signs of a break-in. No shattered windows, no signs of struggle. But when officers reached the nursery, they found something chilling. Words. Written in red across the pale blue wall, in shaky, uneven lettering, just 5 words. You said it was love. Detective Laura Benson, who had worked for over 15 years in Brookdale's homicide unit, was assigned to the case. But this wasn't just another investigation for her. Melissa Ray had been her friend. They'd grown up 2 streets apart. Their children had played together. Laura had been at Lily's birthday party just a few months before. She walked into that house, not as a detective, but as someone whose world had just cracked open. Let me know when you're ready for part 2, where we'll step into the early hours of the investigation. The emotional toll on Detective Benson, and the first signs that what happened wasn't random, it was personal. Detective Laura Benson stepped across the threshold of the Ray residence just after 9:30 a.m. Her boots soft against the carpeted floor as she moved through the quiet, suffocating stillness that had settled over the home. It was a silence that felt unnatural, not the ordinary quiet of a house before morning cartoons or cereal bowls, but the kind that pressed inward, heavy and knowing. She paused for a moment in the living room, her eyes landing on the small plastic cup of juice on the coffee table, half full, untouched. It was the kind of detail that would mean nothing in any other context, but in that moment, it became something else entirely, evidence of a life interrupted, of normalcy halted mid-step. She made her way down the hallway toward the bedrooms, her heart pounding not with the adrenaline of a fresh case, but with something heavier, more personal, a dread born from recognition. She had known Melissa since they were kids, had watched her grow into a woman, a mother, someone who had fought hard to build a calm and steady life after years of personal chaos. This wasn't supposed to happen to people like her, not Melissa. Not in this neighborhood. Not in this way. When Laura reached the nursery, it took everything in her to keep from freezing in the doorway. The room was painted a soft pastel blue, with stars on the ceiling and shelves of neatly organized toys. But her eyes were drawn to the wall, the message scrawled across it in red, jagged lines, the letters smeared in places as if whoever had written it had been trembling. You said it was love. 5 words, just 5. But they screamed louder than anything Laura had ever heard at a crime scene. The words were written directly above Jonah's crib. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no broken glass. But there was something wrong with the layout, something too deliberate. The way the comforters had been smoothed, the way the nightlight had been turned off instead of left glowing, the way every object in the home seemed ... arranged. Back in the living room, officers were already cataloging items. A worn baby blanket with a faint scent of lavender detergent, a set of photo frames with smiling faces, calendar with a red circle drawn around next Friday, Ali's first day of kindergarten. Something else, something else. A second message, this one barely legible, etched into the back of Melissa's closet door with what looked like the edge of a broken key. Tell them I tried. That was the moment it all began to unravel. Detective Benson sat with the coroner's early report later that afternoon. No immediate cause of death was visible on the bodies. Toxicology and autopsies would take days. There was no blood, no trauma. But the children were pale, their lips slightly blue, and Melissa's fingertips showed the faintest sign of bruising, not from a struggle, but something else. Something slower. Something intentional. The media, of course, caught wind by evening. The words triple tragedy were already plastered across local news banners, with stock footage of swing sets and neighborhood watch signs spinning under the headline. But for those who were close to Melissa, for those who had seen her at bake sales and school fundraisers and late-night grocery runs, it wasn't just tragic. It was impossible. Friends described her as present, grounded, fiercely protective of her children. She had no history of depression, no documented mental health concerns, no custody battles, no recent trauma. Her coworkers said she had seemed distracted lately, but no one had expected this. And yet, something didn't sit right. When Detective Benson reviewed Melissa's phone records, she noticed a pattern of missed calls each from the same number over the last 3 weeks. The calls were spaced irregularly, usually late at night. No voicemails left, no text messages. When traced, the number was linked to a prepaid phone purchased in cash at a convenience store 20 miles away. No ID, no name, no trace. But the strangest part came from Melissa's journal, found inside her nightstand drawer. The last entry was dated 5 days before her death. It read, "He knows where I live now. Shouldn't have let him back in. I just wanted peace." Detective Laura Benson sat alone in the evidence room late that night, her elbows resting on the steel table. Melissa's journal open in front of her, each word scrawled in anxious loops and uneven lines, each sentence feeling more like a warning than a reflection. The entry, "He knows where I live now. I shouldn't have let him back in. I just wanted peace." It wasn't just troubling, it was urgent. It hinted at a presence in Melissa's life that none of her friends had seen, someone she had concealed, perhaps out of fear or guilt, or hope that whatever threat they once posed had faded into the past. But that hope clearly had not held. Digging through the journal, Laura found more. Earlier entries were lighter routine frustrations, parenting notes, scattered gratitude, but as the months went on, the tone darkened. Melissa wrote about feeling watched, about strange cars parked too long near her driveway, about receiving unsigned notes on her windshield when she left the clinic late. She mentioned a man she had once been stupid enough to love, someone who made promises he couldn't keep, and apologies that always came too late. No name was ever written, but the presence of this person was unmistakable. It was always just outside the frame of her life, never directly addressed, never fully identified, but always felt. When Laura revisited Melissa's close circle of friends, she asked more pointed questions. Had Melissa ever mentioned a man from her past? Someone who reappeared recently? Someone who made her nervous? At first they hesitated. No one wanted to speculate. No one wanted to accuse. But eventually, one friend, Tina, a co-worker from the clinic, offered something tangible. She remembered Melissa missing a few shifts several months back, said she'd returned quieter, distracted, claimed she was just handling something personal. Tina also remembered seeing Melissa arguing with a man in the clinic parking lot once, late in the evening, after the office had closed. She didn't get a good look at him. He stayed in his car, windows tinted, engine running. Melissa had waved him off, visibly frustrated. And when she noticed Tina watching, she smiled like nothing was wrong and quickly walked away. That was enough for Laura to start digging. Melissa's ex-husband, Peter Ray, had been ruled out early in the investigation. He lived 2 states away, remarried, and had a solid alibi backed by employer logs and credit card transactions. But Melissa's history showed another name. A brief relationship from 7 years earlier. No marriage, no children, no public record of abuse, but a restraining order had been filed shortly after the breakup. His name was Eric Lorne. He had worked as a part-time contractor, no fixed address at the time. The order cited unwanted contact, verbal intimidation, and threats of escalation. But like many restraining orders filed without formal charges, it had expired after 18 months and was never renewed. Melissa never reported further issues, and Eric seemingly disappeared off the radar until now. When Laura ran his name through the department's system, there was no recent activity. No traffic stops, no local employment. But when she expanded the search to neighboring counties, something came up. Her citation issued 2 months ago in a town just 30 minutes away, vehicle violation. The address listed was a rental property under the name of a woman believed to be a relative. The car, a black SUV, matched the description of a vehicle. Caught by a neighbor's security camera near Melissa's home the night before her body was found. The footage was grainy, partially obstructed by trees, but the timestamp placed the vehicle at 2:18 a.m. Slowly rolling past the Ray home, headlights dimmed. Laura drove out to the address the next morning, accompanied by 2 officers. The property was quiet, modest, the front yard overgrown, and a chain-link fence rusted at the corners. No one answered the door. A neighbor said the man who sometimes stayed there didn't have a regular schedule, came and went at odd hours, kept to himself, looked angry all the time. Said his name was Rick, but the description matched Eric down to the scar on his right temple and old injury. Melissa had once mentioned in passing when telling Laura how their relationship ended after one violent night. Laura didn't wait. She filed for a warrant. Inside the house, they found clothing stuffed in trash bags, a burner phone with only one number saved. Melissa signed on a crumpled notepad left behind in the kitchen, a chilling note that read, "She always said I'd never be part of their lives. So I gave her what she wanted." Pieces were falling into place, but the worst was yet to come. Detective Laura Benson stood in the empty living room of the rental property, the air stale and tinged with dust as her eyes moved. Slowly across the scattered remnants of a life that seemed to have been lived half in hiding and half in rage. There were no family photos, no personal decorations, nothing that made the space feel like a home. Instead, there were unpacked boxes shoved against the walls, fast food wrappers on the table, and a mattress on the floor with no sheets. In the far corner, a small rusted desk held a half-functioning laptop and a folder filled with printed documents. Some were old court records, others were copies of social media pages. Screenshots of posts from Melissa's Facebook and Instagram accounts, printed emails, and even a school newsletter featuring a photo of Lily smiling in her kindergarten class. It wasn't just unsettling, it was obsessive. The psychological profile was beginning to write itself. This wasn't a man who had simply moved on after Melissa ended the relationship. This was someone who had tracked her silently, meticulously, from the shadows, gathering pieces of her life like trophies. Every printout was annotated with handwritten notes, comments about dates, expressions, even outfits. One photo of Melissa and the kids at a fall festival had the words "Playing House" scribbled in the corner in red ink. Another, a screenshot of a birthday post, had "No one invited me" scrawled over it. The handwriting matched the message written on the nursery wall. The words were the same, bitter, accusatory, wounded in a way that demanded punishment. The deeper Laura and her team dug, the more the case moved beyond the scope of a single tragedy. It was a timeline of slow-building resentment, methodical control, and a man whose ego could not withstand rejection. Interviews with Melissa's acquaintances painted a portrait of a woman who had done everything right. She left Eric when the relationship became toxic. She filed a restraining order when he began to escalate. She changed her number. She moved to a different city. She started over with a quiet determination to protect her children from a man who had once stood in her doorway and told her she would regret raising them without him. Somewhere along the way, he had found her again. Again, because he never threatened her directly, never left messages that law enforcement could act on, and never crossed the legal line in ways that would register as immediate danger. He remained invisible to the system, just a shadow, watching, waiting. Digital forensics traced the burner phone's activity over the prior 2 months. It had pinged near Melissa's home more than 24 times, always late at night, always brief. It had also been in the vicinity of her workplace twice, and once outside the daycare Ethan had attended before starting school. The chilling reality was that Melissa hadn't just been followed, she had been studied. Every routine, every habit, every location she trusted had become part of a map in Erica's mind, a web of access points he believed gave him the right to re-enter her life. Even when he had been told no clearly and repeatedly, the psychology behind Eric's behavior was textbook in many ways, but no less terrifying in its execution. He exhibited classic signs of what experts refer to as covert possessive obsession, a form of emotional fixation that blends delusion with entitlement. He didn't just want to be part of Melissa's life again, he believed he was owed it. And when that belief was challenged, when Melissa dared to build a life without him, he saw her independence not as a boundary, but as a betrayal. What made the case even harder to stomach was how close the system had come on several occasions to seeing the danger for what it truly was. Melissa had filed 2 reports with local police months before her death, noting that someone had been leaving items on her porch. A toy that didn't belong to her children, a coffee cup from a diner she used to visit years ago, folded piece of paper with no writing on it. Each time, the incidents were logged, but no evidence was found, no suspect named, and no follow-up made. In the absence of a direct threat, law enforcement had no legal grounds to act, and now 3 lives were gone. The case against Eric Lorne was growing stronger by the hour. Fingerprints from the notepad matched his. His DNA was found on the back door handle of Melissa's house, even though no one recalled him ever visiting the property. But before detectives could bring him in for formal questioning, Eric vanished. His cell phone was turned off. The vehicle he was seen driving was found abandoned near a state line. Security footage showed him at a gas station just before midnight, the day the warrant for his arrest was signed. But there had been no confirmed sightings since. A statewide manhunt began immediately, with photos released to the public. His profile sent to every department in a 100-mile radius. As the search widened, the community of Brookdale was left stunned and hollow. Melissa's funeral drew more than 300 people and neighbors. Friends, strangers who had never met her, but had been shaken by her story. Candles were left on the steps of the clinic. Chalk messages lined the sidewalk near the elementary school. You were loved. See you. We will remember. But love and memory were not enough to fill the silence left behind. The manhunt for Eric Lorne expanded across 4 states within 72 hours. A rapid escalation triggered not only by the brutality of the crime, but by the deeply personal nature of the evidence left behind. His photograph appeared on digital billboards, news outlets broadcast his name alongside images of Melissa, and her children, and social media lit up with warnings, calls to action, and pleas for public assistance. Still, Eric remained unseen. He had no known address, no full-time job, no bank accounts that could be traced, and very little digital activity. It was as if the moment he stepped out of the frame, he melted into the backdrop of the country, faceless, mobile, and just clever enough to stay one step ahead of those looking for him. But what he hadn't considered, and what would ultimately undo him, was that Melissa's story was no longer quiet. Her silence had ended the moment the writing on the nursery wall was made public, and her name had become a rallying cry for thousands of people who had lived in fear of the same kind of shadow Eric represented. Detective Benson, running on little sleep and less patience, coordinated with federal authorities to establish a timeline of possible movements based on security footage, bus records, and eyewitness accounts. One gas station clerk in Missouri remembered seeing a man who seemed like he had slept in days, who bought a burner phone, some snacks, and asked if there was a place nearby to get a shower without booking a motel. The transaction was paid for in cash, but the description matched Eric down to the frayed jacket he had last been seen wearing. Another tip came from a rideshare driver in Arkansas who said a passenger had paid him double to drive an unlisted route out of town. No app. It's no ID, just a $100 bill and vague instructions to avoid main roads. These weren't proof, but they were pieces, and each one helped narrow the circle. Meanwhile, Melissa's sister Dana emerged as the most powerful voice in the public campaign to find Eric. Her interviews on national morning shows were raw and unwavering. She refused to refer to Eric as a suspect. She called him what she believed him to be, her sister's killer, her niece and nephew's murderer, and a man who had been allowed to drift through the cracks of accountability for too long. She shared stories that Melissa had kept private out of fear, how Eric had once followed her across 3 cities after she moved, how he'd shown up at her new job without ever being told where she worked, how she'd lived for years with her curtains drawn, even when the sun was shining. Dana's grief burned hot, but beneath it was clarity. She said, "My sister didn't just die, she was hunted. She told people, she asked for help, she made the reports. And still, he came back." Her words struck a chord across the country. Thousands of messages flooded law enforcement tip lines. Some led nowhere, others opened new trails. A park ranger in southern Tennessee eventually spotted someone sleeping in a car parked near the edge of a hiking trail, the license plate crudely covered with duct tape. When he approached the vehicle, the man inside bolted into the woods. The ranger called it in. Within hours, a tactical team surrounded the area. The chase lasted less than an afternoon. Eric was found hiding beneath a makeshift tarp, armed with nothing but a pocket knife and a half-empty bottle of water. Did not resist. He didn't say a word. Back in Brookdale, the news of his capture spread quickly. It didn't bring celebration, only breathless relief. Dana broke down when she received the call. Detective Benson sat silently at her desk for several minutes before exhaling and whispering the only word that mattered. Finally, Eric was extradited back to Ohio, where he faced 3 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges. During the arraignment, he pleaded not guilty, his expression blank, his voice barely audible. The courtroom was packed family, reporters, members of the community, who had stood with candles on cold nights waiting for this very moment. Melissa's photo sat framed on a table behind the prosecution bench. It was her eyes that everyone looked at when Eric was led away in cuffs. Not his. The trial of Eric Lorne began nearly 13 months after his arrest delayed by procedural backlogs. Legal maneuvering and the sheer volume of evidence that had to be processed, cataloged and prepared for a case that had become far more than a local tragedy. It had become a symbol of how silence festers when institutions fail to listen, of how obsession wears a mask of familiarity, and of how dangerous it is to underestimate someone just because they hide their violence behind a quiet face. From the moment the jury was selected, there was a weight in the courtroom, a tension that never lifted. Every creak of the wooden benches, every shuffle of paper, every whispered conversation felt like it echoed too loudly in the heavy air. People didn't speak unless they had to. Even the reporters, who normally crowded around the courthouse doors with cameras and microphones ready, stood a little farther back this time, because this case wasn't just about the lit. It was about grief, a betrayal, and the terrifying question that lingered over everyone's head. How many other Melissas are out there, right now, still waiting to be believed? The prosecution began by methodically laying out the timeline Melissa's 911 calls. The restraining order filed years before, the messages on the walls, the burner phone logs, and the forensic evidence pulled from the rental property. One by one, the witnesses took the stand. A neighbor who'd seen the black SUV parked outside Melissa's home, a gas station attendant who recalled a man pacing nervously near a phone booth hours before Melissa's last recorded call, a digital forensics expert who explained how the burner phone had been wiped, but not well enough to remove its location history. And then there was Dana. Her voice didn't shake when she testified. She looked Eric directly in the eye as she described the years of fear her sister had endured. She read aloud from Melissa's journal, not as performance, but as proof. Her pain wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. The defense, unsurprisingly, leaned hard on doubt. They claimed the timeline was circumstantial, that the messages could have been planted, that the DNA could have been transferred unknowingly from a visit long ago. They said Eric had been in the area. Yes, but not for Melissa. He was seeking closure, they said, hoping to make peace. The suggestion triggered audible scoffs in the courtroom. But the most chilling moment came when Eric chose to take the stand. It was risky, unexpected. He spoke softly, carefully. He said he loved Melissa, that he had made mistakes, but never wanted to hurt her, that she had misunderstood him. He had never seen the children that night. He had just wanted to talk. His version of events was thin, fragmented, laced with contradictions and quiet manipulation. He answered every question with just enough emotion to make someone question if he believed the story himself, and maybe he did. Maybe he had convinced himself somewhere in the twisted recesses of his mind that what he did was something less than monstrous. But the jury didn't see confusion. They saw control. They saw obsession. They saw the face of a man who had tried to write his own ending to someone else's life. Closing arguments were delivered in a courtroom packed wall to wall. The prosecutor's final words were etched in the minds of everyone present. Melissa Ray did everything right. She asked for help as she protected her children. She tried to move on, but this man wouldn't let her. And now she's gone. Her children are gone. All because he believed that if he couldn't be part of their story, no one else should be either. Deliberation took less than a day. The verdict was read just before noon. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, aggravated stalking, premeditated homicide. There were no cheers, no tears, just silence. The kind of silence that says, finally, someone heard her. Months passed after the verdict, and the headlines faded, as they always do. The cameras moved on. The national coverage turned its attention elsewhere. The courtroom where Melissa Ray's name had been repeated hundreds of times returned to its normal quiet. But in Brookdale, nothing really went back to how it was. The front porch of Melissa's home remained empty, the curtains drawn. The chalk messages from the vigil slowly washed away with the rain, but her absence remained sharp, especially for those who had known her laughter. Her quiet strength, her resilience. For Detective Laura Benson, the case never truly closed, not because justice wasn't served, but because she understood that the ache of loss doesn't disappear when the gavel drops. She had made a promise to her friend not just to find the truth, but to make sure no other woman in her town had to live in silence or fear or doubt that her voice would be taken seriously. A program was launched in Melissa's Naman initiative for survivors of domestic harassment and stalking, offering resources, protection, planning, and early intervention. What began as tragedy grew into a force for change. Her story, painful as it is, became something more than a headline. It became a mirror, a warning, and most importantly, a call to listen. Thank you for joining us on this episode. If Melissa's story moved you or made you think more deeply about the stories we don't always hear, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone, and leave a comment below. We read every one, and your voice helps keep these stories alive. If you'd like to follow more real cases like this, stories that deserve to be told, and remember, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss what's next.